Before refrigerators, vacuum sealing, or expiration dates stamped on cardboard boxes, Native Americans had already mastered food preservation in ways that would astonish us today. They weren't just keeping food for weeks or months. They had methods that allowed certain staples to last for decades without electricity, chemicals, or freezers. And the foods they created weren't bland survival rations. They were nutrient-dense, portable, and in many cases tastier than the processed energy bars lining our modern store shelves. The crown jewel of this system was pemmican. Think of it as the original power bar, but one that could keep a hunter alive for weeks. Plains tribes perfected it with buffalo, elk, or deer. The process was simple but genius. First, meat was sliced into thin strips and dried until it was hard as wood. Then it was pounded into a fine powder. The real secret came next. Melted, rendered fat, often from the same animal, was poured over the powder. Sometimes dried berries were mixed in for extra flavor and nutrition. Once it cooled, the result was a dense, high-calorie block that resisted air, water, and decay. A single pound carried more energy than most people today eat in an entire day. To a warrior on horseback, it was survival in compact form. To a modern hiker, it would feel like magic food that never expires. The science behind pemmican was centuries ahead of its time. Bacteria need moisture. By removing every drop of water and sealing the meat in fat, Native Americans created an oxygen-proof, bacteria-proof barrier. Properly made pemmican could last not just months, not just years, but decades. Archaeological records and written accounts from early European traders describe pemmican that remained edible for 30 to 50 years. Imagine stocking your pantry once and not worrying about food again until your grandchildren were grown. But pemmican wasn't the only secret. Corn, the foundation of countless Native American diets, became a survival tool when dried to the point of stone. These kernels were so hard you could mistake them for pebbles, but that was the point. No moisture meant no spoilage. Tribes harvested corn at exactly the right stage, spread it out on mats or hung it to dry, then sealed it in clay jars, bark-lined pits, or woven baskets coated in pitch. Properly dried corn could be stored for decades. Ground into flour, boiled for stews, or even popped over fire, it became a versatile base for countless meals. Then came an innovation so advanced it still shocks food scientists today: nixtamalization. By soaking dried corn in an alkaline solution made from wood ash, Native Americans unlocked its hidden nutrients. This process didn't just preserve corn, it transformed it. The hard hulls loosened, making kernels easier to grind, and the treatment released niacin, preventing malnutrition. In other words, they were solving vitamin deficiencies with chemistry long before chemistry had a name. Modern nutritionists still marvel at how such knowledge developed through trial, error, and generations of observation. Corn, however, was only part of the equation. Beans joined the system as the perfect partner. Where corn lacked certain amino acids, beans provided them. Where beans were incomplete proteins, corn filled the gap. Together, they formed a complete protein source as powerful as meat. And just like corn, beans could be dried rock solid and stored for years in clay vessels or bark-lined caches. The sound of rattling beans stored for winter wasn't just food security, it was the music of survival. Meat preservation extended beyond pemmican. Jerky became a staple across tribes from the Great Plains to the forests. Strips of lean meat, carefully trimmed of fat, were dried in sun and wind until they cracked when bent. Stored in rawhide bags, jerky could last years and provided lightweight protein for journeys. To call modern gas station jerky a descendant is generous. Native American jerky was tougher, leaner, and far more durable. And nature provided its own packaging in nuts. Hickory, walnut, pecan, and acorns came in shells designed by evolution to lock out moisture and pests. Stored properly, nuts could last for years, sometimes longer than the trees that produced them. Acorns required extra work, leaching out tannins with repeated rinses, but once processed they became flour or meal that could sustain entire families. To Native Americans, cracking open a nut wasn't just a snack, it was tapping into one of the oldest survival vaults on Earth. By combining meat, grains, beans, and nuts, tribes created a food system that was balanced, portable, and astonishingly long-lasting. It wasn't guesswork. It was the result of generations of observation and innovation, built on the understanding that survival required not just calories but nutrition. Where modern pantries hold boxes that spoil in months, Native Americans had pantries that could outlast lifetimes. And that's just the beginning. Because beyond meat, corn, beans, and nuts, there were other foods, seeds, fruits, roots, and even sugars, that Native Americans learned to preserve so effectively that early European settlers often abandoned their own methods in favor of these indigenous techniques. Seeds and fruits might look fragile compared to meat or corn, but Native Americans turned them into survival tools that could outlast empires. Take the sunflower, for example. Long before modern agriculture, tribes across North America domesticated wild sunflowers into towering giants with massive heads. Each head carried hundreds of oily, nutrient-rich seeds. Properly dried and roasted, those seeds could be stored for years without losing their energy-packed value. They weren't just snacks. They were fuel, providing oils and proteins that balanced diets heavy on starches and meat. Sunflower seeds became one of the continent's original superfoods, long before grocery stores started selling them in shiny plastic bags. Berries were another secret weapon. Fresh fruit spoils fast, but dried fruit becomes nature's vitamin cabinet. Native Americans mastered this art with cranberries, chokecherries, blueberries, and strawberries. Cranberries, with their waxy skins and natural acidity, practically preserved themselves when dried. Chokecherries required more effort, often crushed whole, pits and all, then shaped into hard cakes. These chokecherry cakes were tart, dense, and loaded with antioxidants. Stored in bark containers or animal skins, they could last decades. For tribes facing long winters with no fresh produce, a handful of dried berries wasn't just food, it was medicine. It prevented deficiencies and kept communities strong when fresh harvests were months away. One of the most ingenious sweeteners came straight from the forests of the Northeast: maple sugar. By tapping trees in late winter, Native Americans collected sap and boiled it down into crystallized sugar bricks. These weren't fragile or sticky like modern candies, they were hard, dense, and built for storage. Wrapped in birch bark or sealed in wooden boxes, they lasted indefinitely. While Europeans paid fortunes for imported cane sugar, tribes in the Great Lakes had their own renewable supply, harvested each spring. A single block of maple sugar could energize hunters, sweeten meals, and preserve food through tough seasons. Roots joined the preservation system too. The prairie turnip, a humble tuber growing wild across the plains, became a lifeline when properly harvested and dried. Digging them required intimate knowledge of the land, spotting small plants in vast grasslands, knowing the exact time to harvest before the roots grew tough. Once sliced thin and dried, prairie turnips turned rock-hard and translucent, a clear sign they were ready for storage. Packed into baskets or caches, they provided carbohydrates and vitamins through the harshest winters. Unlike modern root vegetables that rot within weeks, prairie turnips could sit for years and still rehydrate into nutritious meals. But no food better symbolized Native American ingenuity with water and land than wild rice. Despite the name, it isn't rice at all but a protein-rich aquatic grass seed. For tribes around the Great Lakes, wild rice harvesting was more than survival. It was a cultural celebration. Families paddled canoes into rice beds, one person steering while the other bent stalks and knocked grains into the boat. Once collected, the rice was parched over fire, hulled by trampling in lined pits, and winnowed to separate grain from chaff. Properly processed wild rice could last for years in storage, offering more protein than most grains and a flavor that turned every meal into a feast. Stored in waterproof birch bark containers, it became both food and trade currency, valued far beyond its region of origin. Protein from the waters didn't stop at wild rice. Fish, abundant along rivers and coasts, were transformed into long-lasting meals through smoking. Carefully built smokehouses allowed steady, cool smoke to dry fish flesh until it became leathery and nearly indestructible. Unlike modern smoked fish that requires refrigeration, Native American smoked fish could last for months or even years, its flavor deepening over time. On the coasts, mussels and clams received the same treatment: boiled, cleaned, then dried until brittle. These shellfish, packed with minerals and protein, became lightweight travel foods and trade goods. For inland tribes, a handful of dried clams was exotic treasure, proof of connections stretching from the Atlantic to the Great Plains. Corn, too, received variations that turned it into nearly immortal food. Parched corn, sometimes called the original corn nuts, was made by heating kernels over carefully controlled fires until they became crunchy, dry, and resistant to moisture. Hunters and travelers could carry bags of parched corn for weeks, snacking as they moved. It was lightweight, filling, and required no preparation. Add hot water and it could transform into porridge. Leave it dry and it became crunchy trail food. Properly stored, it could last longer than the clay pots that held it. And once corn or acorns or other grains were ground into meal, the possibilities multiplied. Using stone mortars and pestles, Native Americans turned rock-hard kernels into fine powders. Different grades of meal were sifted for breads, soups, or porridges. Properly dried and stored in sealed jars or bark-lined pits, meal lasted for years. It wasn't just versatile, it was the foundation of daily survival, ready to be cooked in dozens of ways. Unlike modern flour that spoils in months, these traditional meals kept their usefulness across generations. Step by step, seed by seed, berry by berry, Native Americans built a pantry that was as resilient as it was nutritious. Each food was chosen not only for its flavor or calories, but for how well it could withstand time, weather, and storage. Taken together, they created a diet that sustained entire civilizations through droughts, harsh winters, and endless migrations. And yet, this is still only part of the story. Because the ingenuity didn't stop with grains, seeds, and berries. Vegetables, high-altitude tubers, wild aromatics, and even tiny pine nuts played their part in a preservation system that modern survivalists still struggle to match. If you're enjoying this journey into the forgotten foods of Native America, make sure to subscribe and hit like. There's still more to uncover, and the next chapter might surprise you even more. When it came to vegetables, Native Americans didn't just eat them fresh. They found ways to turn even the most fragile produce into foods that could last for years. Take squash, for example. Bulky, heavy, and water-packed when fresh, it seems impossible to store for long. Yet tribes learned to slice squash into thin strips and dry them under the sun or over low heat. These leathery ribbons of dried squash could be braided into long ropes and hung high in storage areas, away from ground moisture and pests. Once rehydrated, the strips returned to life in soups and stews, providing vitamins and minerals during the cold months when no fresh plants were available. Modern frozen vegetables need constant electricity to last a year. These dried squash ropes could stay edible for decades using nothing more than air, heat, and patience. High in the mountains, nature itself provided another miracle: freeze-dried potatoes. At night, the bitter cold froze the tubers solid. During the day, the sun thawed them just enough for moisture to evaporate. Tribes in the Andes are famous for this process, but native groups in North America used similar techniques in colder regions. After freezing, potatoes were trampled to break their cell walls and release trapped water, then left to dry completely. The result looked shriveled and dark, but inside, nutrition was locked in. These potatoes could sit in storage for decades without losing value, essentially becoming the world's first freeze-dried food. Today, scientists need expensive machines to replicate what native farmers achieved with nothing but weather and wisdom. Flavor and medicine often came from the same source: wild onions and garlic. These plants weren't just tasty additions to meals, they were powerful preservatives and natural antibiotics. Harvested at the right season, bulbs were cleaned, braided, and hung to dry in airy shelters. Over weeks, the papery skins hardened, creating a natural shield that preserved the bulb for years. Beyond cooking, they were used to treat infections, soothe bites, and strengthen the immune system. Imagine walking into a storage hut lined with hundreds of dried garlic braids, a treasure chest of both flavor and healing power, available long after the growing season ended. But one of the tiniest treasures came wrapped inside pine cones. Pine nuts were packed with healthy fats, proteins, and essential minerals, making them one of the most nutrient-dense foods available. The problem? Pinyon pines produced large harvests only every few years. That meant when the cones ripened, entire communities worked together to gather as much as possible. The cones were roasted over fire to release the nuts, which were then sorted and stored in clay jars or woven baskets. As long as the shell stayed intact, pine nuts remained fresh for years. For desert tribes, a single good pine nut harvest could carry them through multiple lean seasons. Packed with calories and oils, they were the survival equivalent of gold nuggets hidden in the wilderness. Looking at all these methods together, it's almost unbelievable. With no refrigerators, no plastic packaging, no preservatives, Native Americans created a complete food system where nothing went to waste, and everything had a way to last. Meat became pemmican or jerky. Corn and beans transformed into meals and porridges. Fruits became cakes and dried rations. Vegetables and tubers turned into strips and freeze-dried blocks. Seeds and nuts became long-term energy stores. What's even more impressive is the balance. These foods weren't just about calories. Together they created complete nutrition: protein, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, and minerals. A warrior could ride for days fueled by pemmican and dried berries. A family could survive winter on squash, corn, and beans. A community could trade maple sugar, wild rice, and dried shellfish across hundreds of miles. It wasn't just survival. It was sustainability on a scale that modern society is still struggling to achieve. Today we panic when the power goes out for a few hours. But Native Americans lived generation after generation with food systems designed to last not days, not months, but decades. Every method was tested by time, refined through experience, and passed down as sacred knowledge. And the truth is, many of these techniques still work better than modern preservation methods. Survivalists, homesteaders, even scientists are rediscovering what was known centuries ago, that nature already provided everything needed. So the next time you open your fridge, imagine a world where you don't need one. Imagine a pantry filled with foods designed to outlast storms, droughts, and even entire lifetimes. That was the genius of Native American preservation. And it's a legacy still worth learning from today. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. More untold legends of Native American wisdom are coming, and you won't want to miss them.